Science has been stagnant for hundreds of years because we've been using false models. False models that have been obscuring our path forward. Yes, they may look like and behave like what we think they are, but they are false models. And I call these false models obscuring our path forward. I call them doppelgangers. An example of a doppelganger is for thousands of years we used weight as a measure of quantity. And then after a long period of time we realized that weight is not a good measure of quantity, because if you take a gold bar and put it on the International Space Station, it will weigh the same as a feather because they're both weightless. Your gold bar didn't disappear, but weight does not represent the quantity of gold anymore. And this was the counterexample. Well, actually, there was a simpler counterexample, but this is a counterexample that shows that weight is not quantity. And there's two different ways to demonstrate doppelgangers. The first method is in conjunction with the weight example, is that our footprint in the universe, this represents the universe, this bright area represents our understanding of the knowledge that we have of the universe. And because we don't have all the knowledge, there may be three different models that fit what we see on the right side. It could be a B, it could be an 8, or it could be a 3. And so let's say we choose the 3 to represent what we know because it fits what we know perfectly. And that's like the example of weight equal quantity. It fit perfectly until our footprint in the universe expanded, and it expanded far enough that we found the counterexample. And over here, this represents now that we know more of this universe, and now we can see for the first time that it's not a 3, and in fact it is a B. Okay, so weight does correlate to quantity in some cases. Another example of doppelgangers is obscuration. So what we do know, we may inadvertently use a really bad abstraction or model that may block and misrepresent what we do know. And because of this, we can now say, oh, well, gee, now instead of a B, 3, or 8, we might also be able to fit a capital D into what we know. And there I'm using Spock's beard here to represent the evil doppelganger. And because of this obscuration, it will expand the number of models that fit what we do know. These spheres with equations represent models that fit exactly what we observe now. Only one of these is going to be the theory of everything. But because we're obscuring what we know, we could come up with multiple models that will fit what we know exactly. For example, what we know exactly here could be fit by a D, an 8, a 3, a B. There's probably other items in there that would fit this. So because we have less information because of our own stupidity, we can have more possibilities that we have to wade through. And so it's important that we identify these doppelgangers so we can eliminate them and minimalize them. This is Distinti's Rules of Scientific Acquisition, version 5.1. This is the 6th video, the Doppelganger Tells, which are actually Ambiguity Tells Part 2. The Ambiguity Tell is one of the most prolific tells. It has a lot of offspring. All of these, as well as previous videos and more videos to come, are offsprings of the Ambiguity Tell. And this is the 15th rule, is a Doppelganger Tell. It used to be called the Correlation Obscuration Tell. 34 is the Intrinsity Tell. 22 is the Two-Body Tell. And 24 is the Arbitrary Tell. The Intrinsity Tell is actually an offspring of the Arbitrary Tell, but we'll talk more about that later. Rule of Acquisition 15 is the Doppelganger Tell. All that glitters is not gold. All that quacks is not a duck. Correlation is not necessarily causality, and always consider that anything we know could be a doppelganger. Now, this is the official definition of doppelganger from the dictionary. The Ethereal Mechanics definition is a false construct that looks and behaves just like the true construct. This construct could be a model, a field, an equation, whatever. And because it may take thousands of years for the footprint to expand to expose doppelgangers and other problems in science, the rules of acquisition were developed to identify and resolve bad constructs. And because we're doing this immediately, we're short-circuiting the long cycle of counterexamples of the legacy scientific method. So now we can say that weight correlates to, I'm using this symbol to represent correlates to quantity. And weight is still used as a measure of quantity with restrictions. We still say, go down and get a pound of potatoes or yada, 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 50 pounds of coal, whatever. And what we've done is we've used the term mass now to represent quantity. Mass in kilograms is now our representative quantity. So we've disambiguated weight from mass. And because we've disambiguated weight from mass, and because of Einstein's principle of equivalence, where inertia and weight are equivalent, then we should also disambiguate inertia from mass. This occurred 30 years ago when I developed the model of induction. And this, you see this, looks just like that. F equals minus ma. The minus sign is because inertia is opposite to the applied force. I'll say that again. The inertial force is opposing the applied force. There's the reason for the minus sign. Now, if we take these and bring this down to the next page, and we see we have an arbitrary constant of relation. And if we write down that arbitrary constant relation, and we say, gee, the arbitrary constants of relation always obscure stuff. Everywhere we go, I see arbitrary constants of relation obscure stuff. And that's why I developed the arbitrary tell. If you know what you're doing, nothing should be arbitrary. And there's no reason to have arbitrary constants of relation anywhere. And now, don't be confused with normal constants. We'll talk more about that later. These are arbitrary constants of relation. And if we splay out the units of that arbitrary constant of relation, we find that it's kilogram meter per coulomb squared. And if you notice, we have coulomb squared per meter over here and meter per coulomb squared here. This is basically equal and opposite to this. And all it does is translate what we're calling natural inertia to this doppelganger of inertia called mass. That's all Km does. For hundreds of years, we have considered this the permeability of free space, which has nothing to do with free space because it's a two-body equation, but we'll talk more about that later. So what we're going to do is now we're going to represent our natural inertia as kind of a mass. We're going to use the term m here to represent this as mass as a false representation of inertia. So the little apostrophe here is basically the Spock goatee to this symbol here to say this is not true mass. This is what we're calling mass. It's really inertia. And if we look at this on the right-hand side here, this almost looks like two charges separated by a distance. And if we use that and develop a model of matter from that, we get spectacular results. Because from this system, we can have the inertia of this system is equal to, Q squared over R. And the energy of this system is E equals mc squared, where this is the inertia times c squared. And the reason why I wanted to use this symbol here is so when I show you these equations with this symbol, you will identify what I'm trying to get across. And that this is no longer mass, really. This is inertia. And energy and inertia are synthetic properties of matter, matter being now a two-body system. And from the Ethereal Mechanics model of matter, we see that the electron, the muon, and the tau particle are all the same system, just at higher energy states. And these properties here that physicists call intrinsic properties are not intrinsic properties. They're all synthesized from the model of matter. As you kick the system up into a higher energy state, its inertia goes up as well. So inertia and the energy of the system are correlations. They're not exchangeable. They're correlations. We'll explain that in a second. The charge of these systems is basically a synthesis. As these things spin, they generate the Coulomb force. Okay, these charges are not Coulomb charges, they're pretonic charges. The Coulomb effect is a byproduct of these guys spinning and they really have spin. This spin here, they say, oh, it's just intrinsic property. There's no true spin. That's not true. Well, at least according to Ethereal Mechanics, these systems produce all of their properties, being charge and inertia, from their spin and or their distance between them. And it shouldn't be hard for physicists to accept that you could kick the system up into a higher energy state, because that's how we explain fire. In fire, the atoms are kicked into a higher energy state. The electrons in the atoms are kicked into a higher energy state. And when those electrons fall back to their normal state, they give off light. And that's how we explain how fire glows. So if atoms can be kicked up into higher energy states, there is no reason to suggest that these particles can't also be kicked up into a higher energy state. Okay, but now you have to accept that these are not immutable properties of these particles, that these systems are mutable, that inertia, charge, and spin are all mutable. We only have one intrinsic property left in Ethereal Mechanics, and that's pretonic charge. All other intrinsic properties have been reduced, and at this point we're either thinking that pretonic charge is either area or length. So we're right on the doorstep of resolving that and eliminating all intrinsic properties from physics. Now, energy and mass, or rather energy and inertia, are not exchangeable. They are synthetic properties of matter. And this equation here has been used in the past to suggest that matter and energy are interchangeable. This is the way they explain the teleporter on, or the transporter on Star Trek. As Captain Kirk's matter is decomposed into energy, then it's transported to the surface of the planet, whereby the energy is converted back to matter, and he is reassembled. So they say that this equation says there's interchangeability. In Ethereal Mechanics, all this says is they're correlations. If you kick up your energy, your mass goes up. If your inertia goes up. If your inertia goes down, your energy goes down. So your inertia and the energy of your system of matter are correlated, highly correlated. And let me demonstrate this to you. So if we take the legacy definition of energy, which is mass times acceleration times distance equal energy, well, we see that, well, we got a problem here because we have mass and energy in the same definition for energy. If they are exchangeable, then this is a circular definition. And we can show you that because what we've done, that scientists do all the time, is they will solve this for mass, and then we'll insert the mass in here, and then we'll reduce, and now we have an ambiguous definition. We've gone awry of the ambiguity tell. And this is evidence that our 250-year-old definition of energy is a doppelganger that is obscuring the true model. This definition of energy is not real. It's a doppelganger. It's been hiding the true model of energy. And this, my friends, is a preview of the new energy paradigm. And we have another preview of the new energy paradigm. Our definition of kinetic energy is E equals 1/2 mv squared. So an asteroid heading toward Earth at velocity v will have this much energy when it strikes the surface. But what if the Earth were moving away at the same speed? Well, then there's no energy anymore. This v is relative. So this is a two-body definition of energy. Without the other body, this definition is completely meaningless. And that is not acceptable. Then if we look at the definition of potential energy, same thing. If you don't have the Earth, then the cannonball that's h distance above the surface does not longer have that potential energy. This, again, is a two-body definition of energy. It is not acceptable. And even our Ethereal Mechanics model, our energy is a two-body definition of matter. And this will have to be reconciled in the future, and we will reconcile this when we release the new energy paradigm. But for now, going forward, we're going to use this because where we are using this, it'll be fine. But before we can go ahead with a theory of everything, this has to be reduced to a one-body model. So from now on, we're no longer going to use the evil mass kilogram, because this is now the doppelganger of inertia. And we're going to use the symbol B for burls, which is short for burliness, which basically means heaviness. And the unit of the burl is square coulombs per meter, whereas the evil doppelganger of inertia has been kilograms, which is really mass. And the way you use the terminology now is that this is the force of inertia, this is inertia. So inertia times acceleration is the force of inertia with the minus sign. So if you got a guy in his little spaceship and he's accelerating through the medium, the ether, at 9.8 meters per second squared, his direction through, his acceleration through the medium is in this direction. And because the medium is accelerating through him in this direction, the force acting on him is in this direction, holding him against the bottom of the spaceship. And the same model works for gravity. The Earth is consuming the medium, so the medium is accelerating earthward. And because the medium is accelerating in this direction, it's holding him against the surface of the Earth. The surface of the Earth is essentially accelerating him upwards relative to the medium at 9.8 meters per second squared. And so what we're saying now is one of the ways to resolve the problems is gravity of force is they got the direction of the acceleration of gravity backwards. The acceleration of the gravity is not downward, it's upward. You're being accelerated upward through the medium. And that goes into our list that of the things that humanity got backwards, that acceleration of gravity is up, not down. To go forward now, we're going to talk about legacy units. So legacy units we represent in blue. If you have no ink, then you just say legacy force or natural force. Natural units are represented with black ink. Up here, this is kilograms, this is burls. Okay, this is inertia, this is force, that's also force. You would say natural force, legacy force. Natural newtons, legacy newtons. If you have the ink, you just use the ink. The units of natural force are square amperes. Units of natural energy are square ampere meters. Legacy force is kilogram meter per second squared, and this would be Newton meters for energy. This is a partial list. Constructs paper has more. To go from natural units to legacy units, you multiply by km. To go from legacy units to natural units, you divide by km. That's in most cases. Certain cases you have to, it's the other way around. Usually it's constants, but we'll talk more about that later. And this is the definition of the arbitrary tell. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You can read that on your own. Basically, if you know what you are doing, then nothing should be arbitrary except units of measure. Arbitrary constants of relation obscure underlying mechanisms. If the units of measure are properly structured, then there should be no arbitrary constants of relation. And once arbitrary constant relation are derived from underlying mechanism, they are no longer arbitrary. So let's look at Coulomb's model. I don't say Coulomb's law anymore because a law is a misrepresentation of what we have here. All we have is a model that represents measurements taken in a laboratory. It does not represent a law. Because in no way does this model show you anything that goes on between this and this. It shows you the end-to-end effect. It doesn't explain how the source charge couples to the medium of space, how that distortion is propagated through the medium of space, and how that distortion couples to the target charge. All of that information is obscured by the arbitrary constant of relation, which is this guy over here. And that's why this is a violation of the arbitrary tell, because if you could define this from the underlying physics, then you would know what this is, what's going on, and you would be able to derive this. Let me give you examples of this. This is Coulomb's model. We don't say law. It's not a law. And this is Newton's model of gravity. What Ethereal Mechanics has done is basically change the units of measure such that we don't actually need an arbitrary constant of relation here. We do need c squared. C squared is part of this, but we don't get it from the arbitrary constant relation. We get this because we derived this from the fundamental model of matter. And because this whole thing was derived from the fundamental model of matter, there was no E to begin with here. I mean, think about this. For Newton's F equals ma, why is there no constant of relation? You have just F equals ma. Well, that's because they made force equal to mass times acceleration, so you don't need an arbitrary constant of relation. So as I stated before, if you get your units of measure correct, then you should not need arbitrary constants of relation. You should not need any arbitrary constants of relation. For gravity, because we have the model of matter, we can explain the feeding behavior of the model of matter such that we can derive G from the model of matter. Because we derive this from the model of matter separate from this, then G is no longer arbitrary because now we know where it comes from. In the past, these arbitrary constants of relation were unique to the equation. You can only measure them with the equation. Once you can measure them outside of the equation, they're no longer arbitrary. Now these other constants here, these are normal constants because they're measurable independent of the equation. And you can read the rest of this on your own. That is basically explaining up here what I'm trying to say down here. So now we get to the 22nd rule of acquisition, the two-body tell. And I'm not going to read this whole thing for you. You can read it yourself. But the remedy for the two-body constructs must be decomposed into single-body constructs. That's the remedy. And two-body constructs and fields are okay for engineering applications, but they're not allowed to be part of a theory of everything. So let's talk about the two-body system. Here you have a boat that is transferring energy to the water, and the water is transferring energy from each particle of water to the next particle of water using a propagation technique, and that energy is then going to couple to the buoy, which is going to ring the bell. But let's kick this up a notch here, and let's put two boats rotating around in the same direction. I'm sorry, AI made the boats going in the wrong ones in the wrong direction. Just assume they're both going clockwise around the center point here. And they're generating waves that propagate out and that will eventually hit a buoy. And then if we put those two boats at the center of the area we want to measure, and then we take a buoy and we move a buoy around and measure the amplitude of the bell as a function of distance from the particle, the system in the center. And then we can also say which direction that the buoy is going to rock and then we move it all around and we measure. We can come up with a field that looks just like the fields that we see in classical theory. And it even looks like the same equations, same exact structure that we see. But because we don't have any knowledge, we're not using any knowledge of how the boats couple to the water, how the water couples from point A to point B, and how the water couples, then we can only ever have an arbitrary constant here. If we could model all of this stuff, then we would be able to derive K from all of the constructs that get the water out to here. And then K would no longer be arbitrary. And this is the reason for the 24th rule, the arbitrary constant of relation part of it anyway, is that if you have these arbitrary constants of relation, these are hiding the underlying structure. These are wrapping up the underlying structures into this big boilerplate that you can't see behind, that you have no knowledge of. And this is endemic in physics. This doesn't explain how the energy gets from point A to point B across the distance of space. So therefore, this is a two-body model. It doesn't explain anything in between. It just wraps up force as a function between two bodies. If you don't have the second body, this system is completely meaningless. You do not know what the disturbance of space is. You do not know what the field is. If you do not have a second body, you do not know what the field is, because this is not a true field representation. This is a two-body construct, and therefore it is also a violation of the Doppelganger tell, because it represents what we're seeing, but it completely hides the true nature. And that's why this is also a doppelganger. And from this two-body force, they have developed a two-body field concept. And again, this is not a real field. This is the electric field is defined at each point in space as a force that would be experienced by an infinitesimally small stationary test charge. So it's the force that you would see, just like our example with the buoy. It's a force between two bodies. And without the second body, this field is a completely meaningless construct. It doesn't explain what happens to space. But we draw these field lines as if we know what's going on in space, as if these field lines really exist. Because a true field, a single body field, explains how the single charge, this guy by himself, without any other concept of another body, distorts the medium in its location, and then how that distortion conveys across the medium by itself without consideration of a second body. Okay, this is a would-be field. This is force that would be experienced. Would be, if there were a second body. Without the second body, you have no idea what you have there. The same thing with Newton's gravity model. Exact same identical thing. Exact thing. It's a two-body. Now people say, well, we've got this thing called general relativity where it's been very well worked out to be a very nice field. You should actually look this up and understand this. Then you can educate yourself. And I'm like, no. If we go down, look a little lower on this Wikipedia article, we see here that it's a two-body field. So all they've done is taken Newton's model, here it is, in plain sight, and just added a couple more bells and whistles. And they're using the same exact constant, which they don't know how to derive. They don't know how to derive. It's still a measured value. And because it's a measured only value, this is a two-body field mechanism. It does not describe the true mechanism of the field, how the two masses couple to each other through the medium of space. I don't care how much you talk about the fabric of space-time, this is just lipstick on the old two-body field, which does not even consider the medium of space. So how can you have a fabric of space-time that does not even consider the medium of space? It is so ridiculous. I don't know how we've gotten into this hole and how bad scientific training is that people haven't seen this before. It's really... And the other thing that really gets my goat on this is they talk in terms of this energy. So they take the negative gradient of this energy to come up with this. Well, that's ridiculous. Why are we doing that? Energy is a scalar field. And it violates the vortrality tell. If you're going to be doing physics, energy can only transfer through something that a vector construct or higher, vector or matrix. You can't talk about the transfer of energy from energy because energy is a scalar. It doesn't have a direction. It doesn't have a distance. All you have is this negative gradient. This is ridiculous. We should not be doing physics this way because think about it. The way you get to energy is you take a vector field and you integrate it and dot product by a length to get to energy. And now you're taking a gradient to go back to the vector. There's a whole crap load of lost information in here. This is not the way we need to be doing science. And this general relativity is really just lipstick on a pig. It's just abstracting the abstraction even further. And this is the reason why we can't get anywhere, because all of our models are garbage. They're childish garbage. I don't care how much math you put on top of this. The foundation we're working with is garbage. And then you say, well, okay, well then you come up with the single body model. Okay, glad you asked. So if we start with the model of matter, and this is our first body, which is generating the field, these protons spin at the speed of light and they consume the medium. And because the medium is being consumed, other medium from other areas of space are going to accelerate toward the body to fill in the depletion of the medium. It's going to flow like any other fluid. Okay, that's the field. It's not the force, it's the field. See, I haven't even considered any other body yet. And now I'm telling you what the field is. And then for the second body, over here, because it's caught in a medium that's accelerating toward the left to get to the first body, well then, if we consider this guy first, he's accelerating relative to the medium in this direction. And then you can use this model to compute his effect of force on this guy, which is going to be toward the direction of the flow of the medium. And then likewise, you do the same thing with this guy and you end up with basically 2 times this as the force acting on this body, drawing it toward the other guy. And that is your force. I've separated it into a single body field and a single body force. How do you like them apples? And this is basically an artist's rendition, well, it's actually AI rendition of the way you can visualize it. This isn't real. This is just a Earth in a whirlpool of water. I had AI do this, but it kind of gets the idea across. That if you're standing on the Earth and the Earth is consuming the medium is going to be accelerating through you at 9.8 meters per second squared. But because the Earth is holding you up and preventing you from flowing with the medium, because if you're caught in the medium, you're going to fall and you're going to feel weightless. Because you're flowing with the medium, you do not have a relative velocity relative to the medium, and therefore you cannot feel any inertial force acting on you. And because the Earth is pushing you against the inflow of the medium, you feel the force of the medium accelerating through you, holding you against the surface of the Earth. And likewise, if you're off in space where there is no depletion area, just by simply accelerating through the medium, you will experience the force of the medium flowing through you, holding you to the bottom of your ship. So it doesn't really matter whether you talk about inertia in your ship accelerating through the medium or standing on the surface of the Earth where the medium is accelerating through you. Gravity and inertia and induction are all the same force. Not the same field. The fields are different. The forces are the same. It is so simple, even a physicist can understand this. I have been putting this out here for 30 years. I would expect people just to go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But I get no traction except for a few great followers. And I thank all my Patreon members for following this. It's just so simple. A 5-year-old can understand this. I expected this to go viral and the whole world say, yeah, that makes sense. No one's even tried to plagiarize me. I'm just totally dumbfounded. And I think the problem is humanity doesn't want to believe it could be so simple. They're too busy looking for these overly complicated, quantum entanglement, whatever, compressed gravity, quantum, whatever you call the damn things. They're so overly complicated. Why? Why do people feel the need to build a pyramid when a pine box will do? I don't know why. The question, well, how do you reconcile electromagnetism with the single body concept? We begin with the Ampere matrix field. This is a single proton moving at velocity relative to the medium. This is a location space that you would like to know the distortion of the medium relative to the proton. And at that location, you get a matrix that explains the state of the field. This is at our abstraction layer. I'll explain that in a moment. If you take the time derivative of this, you get the inertial force and the magnetic force. And as explained before, the inertial force is also the gravitic force. Not the gravitic field, not the field of gravity, but the force of gravity. And you take the magnetic force and the inertial force and apply them to the model of matter. As these things spin at the speed of light, you end up developing the electric force. Again, no arbitrary constants of relation are necessary. The C comes from the properties of the model. No arbitrary constants are used here. Okay, this is basically a far-field simplification. It's basically used only for engineering. Also, because we understand how this model feeds and consumes the medium, we get the gravitational field. Okay, again, this is the field, that's the force. We've separated the two-body gravity into two single-body constructs. And because we know how the system feeds, we can derive the constant g from the model. And because g is no longer an arbitrary constant relation, it's derived from the fundamental underlying system, it is no longer arbitrary. But if you want to see, this is in natural units. If you want to see it in legacy units, this is the one place you divide by km to get it into legacy unit. Now from this system, we have the inertial force. And what we found by experiment is that the magnetic force actually generates an anti-gravitic effect. And that's going to be in a later release. We're still studying this rabbit hole. And finally, we have been able to produce a Biot-Savart-like model for the new model of magnetism, which is, again, it's a matrix field, and it's derived from the Ampere matrix field. And it's a spherical field, not the donut-shaped field of legacy physics. Now, what I want to comment on about the model of matter, the model of matter is a two-body construct. And according to the rules of acquisition, we have to derive this as a set of single body effects. And we can do that. Okay, we can split this up into single body effects. The problem is that the synthetic effects of matter go away because you need the two-body effects to synthesize the Coulomb force. You need the two-body effect to synthesize mass, or inertia rather, and you need the two bodies. So we can't separate this. This is the single body of matter. If we separate this, which we can, it's no longer matter. Okay, but the part that is considering that we have to go forward on is that because these guys feed and they attain their energy by feeding the medium, that there needs to be a single body definition of energy. Energy must exist outside of this system. Energy must exist as a single body effect, a single body phenomenon. But what we're going to do for going forward, we're going to continue to use this because where we're using this going up the rabbit hole, it doesn't matter. We'll still use this even though we know it is a doppelganger. The energy is a doppelganger. That needs to be replaced. But right now we're going to use a doppelganger because it works as you go up in scale. And we will be producing the new energy paradigm where we will show how to decompose the two-body energy models into single-body effects. Okay, we're not going to do it in this video. This is going to be a whole separate paper because there's a lot of work done here. I've showed some of the elements of this paper in this video. And this is paper number 6. And this is kind of hard to read, but this is our rabbit hole where we have cosmology at the top. New magnetism, they all are both derived from electrogravity, and electrogravity is derived from pretonics. Pretonics is derived from ethonics. And right now, this is our abstraction level. This is our frontier. The black circles means we don't have a lot of information down here. We have some of it. And the new energy paradigm is one of our rabbit holes that allow us to sink down because we have a lot of the pieces for this, and it's allow us to see below the abstraction layer, because we're going to fill some of these out when we take the deep dive. But before we do all that, we want to get everything up here working right to make sure that our abstraction layer is accurate. And then we're going to use the abstraction layer to fill in the pieces down here so we can derive this layer more precisely. And then once we do that, we're going to use that to go up again to fill in anything we're missing here. Because odds are there's a lot of things outside of what we know that we just don't know yet. And once we fill in some of these missing pieces here, we're going to find all these items we never knew existed, like faster than light travel, free energy, who the heck knows? Things that we have no concept of yet. But we need to fill in some of these dark pieces here in order to find if there's more to the story than what we know here right now. And that's why I use the analogy with my Patreon folks, is that we've got to keep going up and down the rabbit hole, and every time we're going to refine what we know and fill in all the holes we don't know. And I'm using that analogy for this. So that is kind of our path forward. That kind of explains, we have this abstraction layer. It's our frontier, and everything below this is what we really want to know. These gray spots up here represent things I'm not going to spend time on. There's a lot of predictions of cosmology that are really cool, but I'm not going to waste time on it because they're not going to help us identify anything with the abstraction layer that's going to help us go down, because going down is the holy grail of ethereal mechanics. So I'm going to cut out some of the stuff in cosmology because it's not going to help us down here. Okay, let's go look at our punch list. So this is our punch list. And because the doppelganger tell has been moved from a trap to a tell, we're inserting it in this list. The yellow dots represent items we've added today, things that were new since the last time. And this is a mistake from before, because in the past this was the charge is an intrinsic property. That's our last intrinsic property. We had that under arbitrary tell because that's where it was until we spun intrinsity off from the arbitrary tell. So now we have to correct that to move that over to the proper column. So that's what happened here. We recognize now we got the two-body tell of energy. That's kind of new. We kind of developed that before we filled this out. So now we have to be honest here and put that in there. At our abstraction layer, the Ampere matrix field is not a complete mechanism yet. It's got some missing components. So we're going to be honest about this. So what we have here, we have anomalies and 3 violations. 9 anomalies, 3 violations, and these are all at the frontier, at the abstraction layer, where mainstream science has 20 anomalies and 60 violations throughout, and we still have some more items to go before we're done with the tells of ethereal mechanics. And I hope this video has shown you just how bad and how deep the rabbit hole goes. And it just shows how bad the STEM training is out there. Physicists should have found these abstractions, these doppelgangers, hundreds of years ago. I don't know why this training is so bad. I get it. I had the same training and it was awful. My first 10 years out of college was to undo the damage and start developing these rules to counteract the brain shrinkage from the STEM training. It's teaching us really bad things, teaching us a lot of things that are backwards. The things that we're using are garbage, when you look at them in the proper light. So I hope this kind of gets the point across, is that everything we've been using in classical theory is absolute garbage. And, every time I bring this stuff up, I get physicists tell me, well, you just don't understand the math. And, because the problem is they've built these great towers of math. Oh my God, how all the papers out there are just trying to respin math in different ways to try to match what they want physics to be. And I'm the engineer here saying, well, you've spun all this math on top of a foundation of energy, mass, charge, and time, and Newton's laws of motion, which are all garbage. I don't care how much math you have. If you put garbage into math, you get garbage out, just like a computer. And I'm sitting here telling them, what are you doing? And they're just telling me, well, you don't know what you're talking about. We got all these great buildings of math, and we do all these wonderful things. But I'm like, go look at the foundation. And they're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. That's the reaction I get all the time. It's very sad. It really is very sad. So the other rules of acquisition related videos, there's going to have some application videos. I'm trying to make the videos shorter, because one thing I've learned is the longer you make the video, the time it takes to produce it goes up like by the square of the length, it seems like. And one, I'm going to show Newton's laws with regard versus the rules of acquisition, show you how Newton's 3 laws of motion fail the rules of acquisition. And the time doppelganger, which I talked about, I only went over briefly, this concept came up during the making of this video. And instead of including it in the video, which would have just extended the video by another 15 minutes, I decided I'm just going to do a 15-minute video on the time doppelganger. And then for Patreon only, I'm going to give you the situation at the frontier, and I'm going to go over the 9 anomalies and 3 violations and all the items that we have as violated. It's only going to be for Patreon members, so I hope you enjoy that. Again, these are all these abstractions that are just blocking our view. I love this one. This is the analogy for general relativity. So we're trying to use gravity to explain gravity. It's kind of, again, a circular definition. If you want to help out, become a Patreon member. If I can get a whole crap load of people paying me $5 a month, I can do this full time. Right now, my JOB is my #1 source of funding for this. I spend all my vacation hours on this. I haven't taken a real vacation since 1999. And other than house maintenance or doing things for family and taking care of my 2 cats, every other ounce of time is spent on this. My Patreon members have helped out dramatically. My great 70 Patreon members, they've helped improve the quality of equipment that I can purchase with their donations. I appreciate that. And hopefully we can get the human race in a good situation to save itself from the oncoming extinction level event. This is the repository, If you want to understand how to find everything here, all of our published papers and all of our videos are listed here in order, so you don't have to go trudging through YouTube or whatever to find everything. Go to the Ethereal Mechanics YouTube site. Look at the intro video. The intro video will explain to you how to navigate the repository. Also, all of our Ethereal Mechanics topics are under their own playlist. This is the blog site. Big shout out to Sebastian for taking care of this. I apologize. I don't have the time to spend here, but again, if I could get enough Patreon members, I could do this full time, and I would definitely spend time here. Heck, if I get even more, I will hire interns to take care of a lot of the traveling through the rabbit holes. Thank you. No more voodoo physics.